Jam 20. Jau 700 metų. 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 Jam 20. Jau 700 metų.
So, Pierre Leclerc, who is he? Monsieur Pierre Leclerc. Here you are. So, ladies and gentlemen, I may introduce to you my dear friend and colleague Pierre Leclerc, from France. He is talking about various families in northern Burgundy originating from Lithuania, Belarus and Ukraine. Pierre, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. No?
Are you speaking in English or in French?
Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. I will be speaking in English if you want to. Okay.
It's
En français.
En français, okay. Donc, okay. So, my name is Pierre Leclerc, which means Peter Clark in English, and I'm the current chairman of the Genealogical Society of the Yonne in northern Burgundy, as you may see here. And today is I think it's the International Day of the Archives, so I put some page markers over there from my local archives in northern Burgundy. You may take them all. I don't want to bring back to France. So, sorry. Okay. As a prologue, of course, I would like to say a few words about the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and, of course, about northern Burgundy and my own genealogical society. Of course, you know your history, so I won't tell much about that, but the French don't, because in France, we never heard about the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. We only speak about Poland. We speak about the Kingdom of Poland and about the Republic of Poland, which is the word in French for the Commonwealth. So, of course, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was composed of two territories. First of all, the current states of Lithuania and Bielorussia from 1240 to 1795, and a significant part of present-day Ukraine from 1353 to 1569. In 1569, the Grand Duchy ceded Ukraine to the Kingdom of Poland within the new Commonwealth of the two nations against Russia. And in 1795, the Commonwealth was completely swallowed by its three neighbours, namely Russia, Prussia and Austria. Now, of course, northern Burgundy is the red part on the map here. In fact, it's called in French le département de Lyon. Within Burgundy, Burgundy is the whole thing, the red and the yellow thing. So the northern Burgundy, the département de Lyon, was founded in 1790 during the French Revolution. Its territory is sometimes called Lower Burgundy in some books, and its capital is the city of Auxerre, as you may see here, where I was born, and which was founded by a Celtic tribe before 52 BC, so it's much older than Vilnius. I think I forgot something. Sorry. Yes. Auxerre is well known for two tombs, which has a link with the former Grand Duchy of Lithuania. You've got an old churchyard called St. Cemetery, where you can find the tombs of Maurice Mochnacki, born in western Ukraine, who started in 1830 the insurrection of the Poles against the Russians in Warsaw, and Konstanty Parchevsky, who was born in Lithuania, who was born in, I don't know where, who started the same insurrection in Vilnius in 1830. They both died in Auxerre. The first one died in 1834 in Auxerre, and the second one, Konstanty Parchevsky, died in 1855. The body of Konstanty Parchevsky is still in Auxerre, but on the other hand, the Polish government decided 2 years ago to take the Maurice Mochnacki back to Poland. I attended the ceremony on the 26th of November 2021 at the Church of St. Genevieve in Auxerre. Well, by the way, you can see a few pictures of Auxerre, beautiful city, come and visit it. Now, a few words about my own genealogical society, which was founded in 1881. It is located in Auxerre, and you can see on the right the coat of arms of this non-profit learned society with its French motto, "We clamber back in time." We climb back in time. Nous gravissons le temps, which stresses on mutual efforts we've got to make, to progress in genealogy. In fact, so it indicates that our major goal of the society is to organize and supervise an ambitious collective work for the benefit of everyone. So in 1884, I asked all the members of my society to take part in a long-term collective work consisting in recording in a huge index all the marriage entries found in all the church books in northern Burgundy before 1793, and in all the civil registers of the same area after 1792. The job is finished yet. For the whole period prior to 1793, we have recorded so far up to 380,000 church marriages in northern Burgundy, so before 1793. And the work continues now for the present time after 1792 in the same district. And we have recorded so far up to 180,000 marriages in the same district. So I used this huge index to search for Poles, including Lithuanians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians. So before the French Revolution, not a single Pole ever married in northern Burgundy. In fact, there was a Polish prince who lived there, and this Polish prince is Xavier of Saxony. He lived in northern Burgundy from 1771 to 1775 in the local castle of Chaumont. You can see the picture here, which belonged to him until he left France in 1791. So he was the maternal uncle of King XVI of France and the second surviving son of King Augustus III of Poland, Grand Duke of Lithuania and Prince-Elector of Saxony. His daughters Beatrix and Cunigunde were both born in the castle over there. So everything started in France during the French Revolution and after the French Revolution. In fact, the very first emigration wave to northern Burgundy, from Lithuania, Belarus and Ukraine, was composed of prisoners of war during the French Revolution and the First French Empire. Well, the First French Republic declared war on Austria in 1792, and at the end of the war, in 1815, the map of Europe had changed completely. France did not gain any new territory after 23 years of war, but the main victors, in fact, were the Russians. You can see that they wrested Finland from the Swedes in 1809, and they wrested Bessarabia from the Turks in 1812, and they swallowed most of the Polish-Lithuanian state in 1793, 1795, and it finished in 1813 when they came back. The minor changes occurred toward the end of the war. The Swedes took Norway from the Danes in 1814, and the Dutch took Belgium from the Danes, from the Austrians in 1815. In 1815, some prisoners of war remained from your area, remained in northern Burgundy, and got married. So I'm going to concentrate on them. Well, there's out of 180,000, only one Lithuanian married in northern Burgundy after during the French after the French wars, the Napoleonic wars, and you can see his name here. Well, it's written in French, of course. That he couldn't write and read, so the French had to interpret the real name. So in French, it's Prokop Druz. I don't know if it sounds Lithuanian to you or Polish. Anyway, Prokop Druz. He was born about 1772 in Vilnius, Lithuania, in this town, and he was captured by the French in 1795 while serving in the Austrian army in the besieged fortress of Luxembourg. So they came all the way from Lithuania to be captured in Luxembourg. So he was sent to by the French to Chablis. It's a viticultural, very well-known viticultural village in northern Burgundy, where he began working as a stonemason. And in 1793, during the French Revolution, he married 3 times, in fact. He married first Marie-Véronique Beugnier, then in 1809 he married in Hainaut Marie-Anne Giraud, and in 1824 he married in Beaumont Julie Leroy. He finally died in Beaumont in 1858 at the age of 86, and he was the father of 13 children. Many people descend from this couple, and these couples in France. There's only one prisoner of war from Belarus. His name is Etienne Jaworski. His parents were Jean-Baptiste Jaworski and Catherine Mayarovsky, according to French documents, of course spelled the French way. He was captured by the French in Germany while serving in the Prussian army, and he was sent by the French to Villeneuve-la-Guyard in the north of northern Burgundy, where he began working as a servant. He married in Villeneuve-la-Guyard Louise Dessulot, and he could sign his name in Russian. You can see the way. He didn't use the Belarusian I, but the Russian I, which looks like an inverted I. And he became a wig maker in Villeneuve-la-Guyard in 1804 during Napoleon time, and he finally died in Villeneuve-la-Guyard in 1822 at the age of 55, and he was the father of 7 children. 11 prisoners of war came from Ukraine. I won't read all the things there, and all I can say is that I think I'm 11 came from Galicia, which had been annexed to Austria in 1772, and 2 came from Podolia, which had been annexed to Russia in 1793. So they married French women, and you can see that the names too, they're very much Frenchified, you know. You can say Millière, Sibrachu, Sidou. No one would know in France that they were from Lithuanian or from Ukrainian origin. The second emigration wave started in 1831 after the insurrection of the Poles. I mean the Poles in general, you know. I mean, of course, the Poles plus the Lithuanians plus the Belarusians and the Ukrainians in 1830. And as I said, Konstanty Parchevsky and Maurice Mochtarski came to. Where's my paper? Okay. So, as I said before, so Konstanty Parchevsky married. He was already married when he came to northern Burgundy. So he didn't marry in northern Burgundy, but he was married in Paris, and he died in 1855. And Maurice Mochtarski died as a bachelor. So, but other refugees, though, married after 1831. 2 refugees from Lithuania married in northern Burgundy. The first one was Vincent Trushinsky, who was born before I wrote about 1801, but 2 days ago I came to this place and found his baptism certificate. So I can say that he was born in 1801 in Oekmerge, which is now Wilkmerge, and the entry is in Polish. So he was born, in fact, in Wilkomierz, in Polish. His parents were Alexandre Trushinsky and Madeleine Kruszewska, according to French documents. He was a second lieutenant in the Polish cavalry during the insurrection, and in France he became a lockkeeper in the village of Céry, northern Burgundy. In 1857 he married in Céry Simone Boiseau, and he died in Céry, which is a small village now, in 1886, and he was the father of 1 single son. The second one from Lithuania was Kazimir Wierzbinski, who was born in 1813 in Vilnius. I couldn't find his birth certificate because, unfortunately, the register has gone away somewhere. I don't know where it is. They don't have it here anyway. So his parents were Jean Wierzbinski and Madeleine Kratunska, according to French documents, and he was non-commissioned officer in the 6th Polish Light Cavalry Regiment. In France, he became a locksmith in the city of Joigny, northern Burgundy, and he married in 1849 in Joigny Cécile Émilie Guillaume, and he died after 1864. I couldn't find his death certificate in an unknown place, and he was the father of 5 children. There was no refugee from Yellow-Russia, and there were 3 refugees from Ukraine who married in northern Burgundy. The first one was Dominik Renkiewicz, who was born in 1806 in Ostrov, in the province of Volhynia, in western Ukraine, and his parents were Pierre Renkiewicz and Catherine Runkai. In 1843, he married Marie-Jeanne Martin in Avallon, in the south of northern Burgundy, and he died in Paris in 1884, and he was the father of 4 children. The second one was Clément Broschnowski, born in 1813 in Orinin in Podolia, and his parents were Martin Broschnowski and Caroline Piskovska, according to French documents, of course, and in 1851 he married in Auxerre Amélie Thérèse Jeanne Drouot, and he died in 1885 in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, near Paris, and he was the father of 3 children. And the last one from Ukraine was Ignace Charles Matyovsky, born in 1817 in Dubno, in the province of Volhynia, and his parents were Michael Michel Matyovsky and Sophie Pujevska. And in 1851, he married in Auxerre Théodore Marie-Louise Viltard de la Guérie, a noble woman. He was himself a nobleman in Ukraine. And he died in 1879 in Abbeville, in the north of France, and he had 1 single daughter. The third emigration wave to northern Burgundy from the current states of Lithuania, Belarus and Ukraine was composed of Russian soldiers. I say Russian in brackets because of course they came from many countries in Russia. Russian soldiers during the First World War, and after that Polish labourers after the war. In 1916, the Russian Emperor Nicholas II sent a Russian expeditionary force to France composed of 4 brigades with 44,000 men altogether. They were supposed to support the French on battlefields. In fact, they didn't do much, but they fought 1 battle. And unfortunately for them, I should say, after the October Revolution, the French decided to disband the 4 brigades. By the way, I ought to say that the 1st and the 3rd brigades remained in France to fight the Germans, and the 2nd and 4th brigades were sent to Macedonia to fight the Bulgarians with the French. So in the beginning of 1918, the 4 brigades were disbanded by the French, and most of the soldiers were converted into woodcutters. So they were sent everywhere in France. So 500 woodcutters came to northern Burgundy and began to cut wood, and some of them remained after the war. And out of all those Russian, there were some people who came from your area, but, sorry, I should say something else too. Sorry, that's the one. Is this the, okay, I forgot to speak about the maps here. You can see that the change of the maps, the First World War has changed completely the map of Europe, to a large extent, thanks to 2 major victories. First of all, the Germans defeated the Russians in March 1918, but fortunately enough for you, a few months later, the French and the British, with American help, defeated the Germans, the Austrians, in November. And these 2 victories enabled the creation of new republics in Europe. Republics are not kingdoms, like Lithuania and Poland, thanks to those 2 victories. The Germans first, and the French, and the British after. And after the war, in 1919, the victorious French government signed an economic agreement with Poland in order to allow many Poles to come and work in France. France had lost 1,500,000 men. And of course there was a lack of men to, first of all, to marry and to repopulate France, and even to work, because France was a rich country at the time, so they asked poor countries at the time in Europe, like in Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Poland, to send their poor people to France in order to get a job. So amongst them, a significant part of labourers came from Western Ukraine, which was annexed to Poland in 1921. So no one came from Lithuania, because they were not. There was no agreement with Lithuania and France. No us. So from Bielorussia, you had. This is a soldier. So 2 soldiers from Bielorussia. One soldier from Bielorussia. So remained in France. It was amongst the 500 woodcutters who were sent to northern Burgundy. So his name is Isidore Matysiak. He couldn't write and read, so his name was written the French way. And he was born in 1896 in Ragachov in Bielorussia. His parents were Eustache Matysiak and Catherine Kostianuk. And he arrived in France in 1916, as I said before, as a Russian soldier. But after the October Revolution, he was part of the 500 Russians who came to northern Burgundy. And he refused to go back to Bielorussia after the war, because all the soldiers were asked, do you want to go back to Russia? Almost no one wanted to go there. And some of them married in northern Burgundy. And he married Suzanne Plain in Mailly-le-Château in northern Burgundy, and became a French citizen in 1934, and died in Mailly-le-Château in 1943, and had 2 daughters. In fact, we have two Ukrainian soldiers who remained there. Terence Lisakowski, born in 1819 Mariupol in eastern Ukraine. So he arrived in France in 1916. He married in 1919 in Saint-Amand-Puisé, Marguerite Augustin Camus. And in 1925 he married his first wife's sister, Agathe Racine Camus. And he left Saint-Fargeau after 1926, and his first wife had given him 2 children. I don't know how many children he got with his second wife. And Pierre Tkach, very hard to pronounce to the French people. Pierre Tkach, born in 1895 in a village called Zagnienkovo in French, in Podolia. He arrived in France in 1716 as a soldier. He became a Russian woodcutter, and he married in Saint-Martin-en-Puisé in 1920 Léontine Désirée Camus. And he became a French citizen in 1947, and he was the father of 3 daughters. And now, the majority of the people who came as labourers, almost exclusively, I should say, 17 labourers came from Ukraine, especially from Western Ukraine. And so I won't tell all the names there, but 6 men married French women. 5 women married 3 French men, 1 Pole and 1 Czech. So the Pole is Felix Franczak, and Jan Skrawacz is the Czech. And you've got 3 couples of Ukrainians. So a Ukrainian man married a Ukrainian woman. I don't have any picture apart from one. This is the 4th couple. I got this picture recently, about 3 weeks ago, from a descendant of this couple. So this is Olena Svistin-Lutzka, who came from Western Ukraine, who married Basil Chapura from Western Ukraine too. They were Greek Orthodox, so they were Ukrainians, they spoke Ukrainian. and they married in Sens on the 14th of May 1927. And now, as an epilogue, I would speak about, of course, now the fourth emigration wave, which is the Ukrainian refugees who fled Russian aggression in 1922. You have now, not the current, but about those ciphers dated back from 2 months ago. I got them from the United Nations. So you can see, I won't explain everything, but you can see that more than 8 million fled Ukraine. Most of them went to Poland and Germany. And a few of them, only 120,000 came to France. And I asked the governor of Northern Burgundy how many Ukrainians came to our area. Only 435. So I'm sure, as you saw before, that some of them remained and married in France. I'm sure that out of them, at least one, a woman normally, would marry and remain and start a family in France. Yes. So 8 million represents 18% of the Ukrainian population. Yes. So now, out of the 435, all of them are women and men. You have 111 children, so in Northern Burgundy, going to school, 70 to primary schools and 41 to secondary schools. And so they're all women. But why? Because of course you know that men are still fighting. And of course I would like to end up my presentation with Timothy Shadura, who became the symbol of Ukrainian resistance against Russian barbarity. I would like to end off my presentation, therefore, with the very last words this man uttered before being shot to death by Russian military criminals of war, which is, of course, Slava Ukraini. And those two pictures I took yesterday in Vilnius, with a Vilnius Ukraine refugee, and of course the love of Lithuania for Ukraine. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very, very much. And I especially appreciate that you were talking in English so that more people could understand what you said.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. Do we have questions in the audience? Yeah, I know. Okay, when there are no questions, then I would like to invite Scotland to the stage. Pierre, yes, if you please. Be so kind to sign here. Be careful.
Here? Yes. Here?
Okay, thank you very much. So let's see. Was it? So. Let us find your presentation.
Just stop. Second.
The second one, this one?
Top. From top second. Stop.
No. Top here. This one? The beginning. So, may I introduce to you my dear colleague. This is
Okay,
Dr.
I'm
Bruce.
not going to sing.
We are waiting for that. May I introduce to you Dr. Bruce Dury. He is talking about Scots in Lithuania and Lithuanians in Scotland. He comes from the University of Edinburgh and he is a member of the International Academy of Genealogy. And he comes from Scotland. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be in Lithuania, you know, the country that was the first one to go independent from the old Soviet bloc, and speaking the oldest language in Europe, yes? And there are lots of links between Scotland and Lithuania. Scots coming here, Lithuanians going to Scotland, and I hope to talk about some of those. Which Lithuania are we talking about? Actually, Pierre has already summarised this, and his maps were far better than mine, so I won't go through all that. But I'm going to concentrate on two time periods One is about the late 16th, early 17th century in Lithuania, and one is the early 20th century in Scotland. By the way, I am not going to read every one of these slides. The reason the words are on here is if anyone would like a handout, a PDF of this presentation with all the information, I will send it to you. Just email me and I'll send it, okay? So you have all the information. Stop taking notes. We've had contacts with Lithuania since the days of the Hansa. And you know, at that time, Scotland was the largest exporter of wool in the whole of Europe. And although we weren't part of the Hanseatic League, we were trading with all the Baltic states, with North Germany, and so on. And something like 4,000, maybe 7,000 Scots ended up in Lithuania from those times into the 17th century. Now, sadly, they're difficult to find nowadays. They really lost their identity because they just became involved in Lithuanian society, and they found that their names changed, the kind of process Pierre was talking about. For example, there was a family called Dunbar, which I found now known as Dabart, and Sinclair is now Sinclair. Greg became Grieg. In fact, it was a Greg family in Norway who were the ancestors of Grieg, the composer, and it was a Scottish Learmonth who ended up in Russia as the ancestor of Lermontov, and so on. So the Scots were all over the Baltic like a rash. Okay. What did they look like when they came here? This is from this time. Not like the ones on this side. That's a Highlander. And most Scots who came, the vast majority, were Lowlanders like me. So they're dressed more like the man on the right. Very similar to the costume that we'd been here at that time. And they really fell into three categories. There are what we call subsistence migrants, people who just had nothing in Scotland, and they thought if they went to another country they might find something to do, might find a living, and some of them did. A lot of them were we call them peddlers or tinkers, travelling people selling things. Yeah, some of them were betterment migrants. They were entrepreneurs. They were skilled artisans. They were craftsmen. They were business orientated. They were typically young. They were upwardly mobile, and they knew if they went to another place, then they might find a way to improve their position. And there were opportunity migrants, people who saw a chance to make links between the two countries, academics, educators, also traders, business people, but soldiers, mercenaries, not just officers, many of those, which I'll tell you about, but just normal serving soldiers. The Scots have a tradition of what we call fighting for strangers. Scots will go any place for a fight, yeah? And they're happy to come to Europe to do it. In fact, there's a very famous picture you may have seen. This is often used as evidence of the Scots being in the service of the Swedish king, in this case Gustav Adolphus. And look at Scottish people, because they're wearing kilts. Everybody misses the writing at the top of this picture, which actually says Irlander. These are Irishmen, not Scots at all. So we did not come wearing kilts like this. Genealogists talk about push factors and pull factors. Push factors are the thing that drive you out of your home. Pressures on demography, low living standards. We had a lot of religious conflicts at this time in Scotland. Scots have spent most of the history fighting amongst themselves and not with anybody else. There were wars, there were famines. Nobody ever heard of the Scottish potato famine, but it was just as bad as the Irish one. There were repressions, and there were inheritance problems. If only the oldest son is going to get the farm, the land, the house, the business, what do the younger sons do? Well, they join the church, they join the army, or they go abroad to start trading. And then there are pull factors, things which encourage you in. And there was a lot of capacity for foreigners in Lithuania. Lithuania was very welcoming. Opportunities for commerce, they wanted trade. There was religious freedom, or at least religious tolerance. And we see both kinds of migration. What we call chain migration, which is one person goes and then they bring a whole load of other people, their families or their community or their associates. And cyclical migration, people going back and forward between those countries over a number of years. But there was also the possibility of getting lands and honours. I'm going to come back to this picture at the bottom in a moment. But one of the key figures in this is Duke Radziwiłł, because one of the Radziwiłłs became Protestant, Lutheran, living in Kedinai, then that was a very congenial place for Scots to go, as Protestants ourselves. They could set up a Scottish church, the Catholic Church didn't bother them, so a lot of Scottish merchants did in fact end up in Kedinai. And some of them got honours, got land, got positions in the court of the Radziwiłł dukes. And in fact, if you go to Kedinai, which is just a little bit northwest of here, you will see these houses, and they are known as the George Anderson House, the John Arnott House, the James Gray House, the Alexander Gordon House. The names of these Scots are actually commemorated to this day in those buildings. So there was a big community there, mostly of tradesmen, artisans, churchmen, and some academics. So that's the Lithuanians, the Scots in Lithuania. But they kind of dissolved away. They got into marriage by having their names changed, by some of them coming back to Scotland. They don't have a big footprint in Lithuania today, which is a shame. I bet there's lots of people out there in Vilnius and Kaunas and so on who really are Scottish in heritage, but they don't know they are. You should get them all DNA tested, okay? Right, what about Lithuanians in Scotland? That's not such a happy story, I'm sorry to tell you. First of all, we talk about three kinds of migrants. Stage migrants, those who went to Scotland just so they could go on to America. One of those. There are stuck migrants. They wanted to get further, but they never did. They arrived in Scotland thinking, we'll work for a time, make some money, then we'll get the boat to America. But for whatever reason, they got married, they had children, they had a business, they decided to make a life in Scotland. They were stuck there. And then there are misled migrants. This really did happen. Someone in Lithuania would buy a ticket to go to America, and the boat would get to Scotland, and the captain would say, "This is America, everybody off." Okay? There's a bit of myth and anecdote in there, but I have come across real examples of that happening. So they're standing in Leith, the port of Edinburgh, going, "This is New York." And mostly they just stayed. But the vast majority of Lithuanians who got to Scotland were specifically recruited. Now, a lot of Lithuanians left Lithuania between 1870 and 1914, and we've seen some of the reasons for that. The ones who came to Scotland mostly landed in the industrial belt, and I'll explain why in a moment. And by 1914, we reckon there were something like 12,000 Lithuanians in Britain, but more than half of those were in Scotland. They're difficult to find, and I'll explain why. Just going back a step, there was one particular coal company who sent agents over to Lithuania. Mary and Cunningham was one of the biggest firms, and they recruited men and their families to come to Scotland so they could be coal miners, because the Scottish industry was booming. Glasgow was the second largest city in the British Empire because of all the industry, the shipbuilding and the making trains and railways and digging roads and so on. And people were needed to dig coal and to dig iron. And most of the coal miners, that's a very dim slide, went to the east coast and just west of Glasgow, and most of the iron miners ended up on the west coast. And we're going to specifically look at this area here in the middle of Scotland, just to one side of Glasgow. It's called Lanarkshire. Now, there are two problems with them being there. One is they were not popular, and various people fomented outrage against them. I'll describe that. And the other one was that they often were not recognised as Lithuanian. They were called Polish, like Pierre was saying, right? I'll show you some examples. The other problem was, of course, that all of those, I'll talk about Jewish Lithuanians later, but all of these Lithuanians they were mostly Catholic. They were coming in, and Scotland, of course, was strongly Presbyterian. When in 1920, the Church of Scotland, Presbyterian, was telling the government to send all the Irish back to Ireland because they were Catholics. The famine's over, go home, you know. And equally, Lithuanians, being Catholics, were not all that welcomed. A lot of hostility. And they also, the other reason they're hard to find is, many of them had their names changed. The very thing Pierre was talking about in France. So someone whose name is Pavlovskas gets his name changed to Paul, or someone whose name begins with G gets the surname Gordon or something just because of that. I came across one really good instance, two instances in fact, where someone who either couldn't read and write or nobody understood what he was saying. So he said, "What's your name?" And he says, "Well, okay, make your mark." So he marks the paper for the signature, so they call him X. Another one was called Marx for the same reason. These families still exist. I'm going to show you, this is a census from 1911 from Holytown, which is that part of Lanarkshire where all the Lithuanians went. I know you can't read this, so here they are. You can see groupings of Lithuanian families. Notice these families, sometimes there are like 8, 9 people there. They are living in a house that has 2 rooms with windows. This is very cramped conditions. Can you imagine? If you look at who they are, they're all coal miner, coal miner, coal miner, coal miner. They're all working in the coals. And when you look at where they are recorded as being from, it says Lithuanians who are Polish, but they are Russian citizens. It's not surprising people were confused. Here are some of the names. Any Lithuanians here will recognise those as being proper Lithuanian names. So they didn't get called Marx or X or Paul or anything. However, something else happened. This man, Keir Hardie, you may have heard of him. He's a hero in Scotland. He more or less invented the Labour Party, still today the biggest socialist party in Britain, the number 2 party in Westminster Parliament. And he was an official for the Mine Workers Union in Ayrshire, and he led a campaign to kick out Lithuanians from Scotland. Now this man is revered in Scotland as a great hero, but when you read what he had to say, it'd be better if people who come to Scotland can be sent back. Scotland should be for the Scottish. Exactly what Trump is saying in America, exactly what the Conservatives are saying in England. And what does he say about the Lithuanians? They've got filthy habits, they're dirty, they don't speak the language, they cook strange things, garlic that they smell, and they're bringing the Black Plague. Right? The sheer racist bigotry that you find in countries which are trying to expel migrants as quickly as they can. There were newspaper campaigns against Lithuanians, just some examples here. But notice they always talk to them, they always speak of them as being Polish because they didn't recognise the difference. And they kick us out of our houses, they take our jobs, they marry our women. Bad stuff. And then, of course, the war happens, which was really a kind of family squabble between the grandchildren of Queen Victoria, right? There was a lot of hostility against Germans in Britain, against Italians in Britain, and against Lithuanians, Polish and Russians. Then, in 1917, Britain signed an agreement with Russia, which meant that all these Lithuanians had to go back to join the Russian army. And many of them were just kicked out. What happens to their families? Suddenly, if they're living in a house that's owned by a coal mining company, they get kicked out of their house and they get deported as well. About 400 Lithuanians, we reckon, were sent back to what is now Russia in 1920, plus the fact a lot of Lithuanians had gone to fight for the Russians against Germany, and when the revolution happened in Russia, they were stuck there, so they never got back. So a lot of the Lithuanians disappeared from Scotland. The ones who stayed, they found it difficult to keep a sense of community. They knew that they were, foreign, and they wanted to blend in, and the First War had generated a lot of hostility towards all foreigners, to be honest. So they kind of went underground, they kind of hid. They adopted Scottish names. This happened all over Britain, actually. But then, two things happened in the Second World War. One is that at the end of the war, of course, Stalin and Churchill and Roosevelt had the Yalta Pact, which meant Stalin wanted all these Lithuanians back in Russia. And would you know it, the British government sent them, can you believe? But also, we received a lot of people that we called displaced migrants, who ended up in Britain, and about 400 Lithuanians specifically settled in Scotland after, or during and after the First World War. But where did they go? Well, they went to places where they would find other Lithuanians, the same coal mining communities in the middle of Scotland, just east of Glasgow. And they started again to build a community there. There is a Catholic shrine in a place called Carfin, which is exactly in that area. And Lithuanians have a corner of it, they have a plaque. There's a Lithuanian priest there who looks after them, a Catholic priest. They go to the grotto to pray there, and it was a kind of centre for the growing community. And in the 1950s, they started a Lithuanian social club. There we are. I had a very good night there recently. I don't remember most of it. There was lots of dancing, lots of costume. What this means is that 4 generations later, families who'd lost their Lithuanian heritage are regaining it, it's coming back to them. The children are learning Lithuanian again. There are people from Lithuania visiting, they go to visit, and so on. And it's all happening. Now, separately, there was Jewish Lithuanian immigration. They didn't come to be coal miners. Mostly they were getting out from Russian-controlled states and Poland during the pogrom period, and they wouldn't be given jobs in banks or schools or hospitals or anything. So mostly they started independent businesses: jewellers, tailors, craftsmen, sellers of food. Music teachers was a common one. There's a huge Jewish archive in Glasgow, and I got a lot of information on Lithuanian Jews, because they said they were Lithuanian, by the way, not Polish, in this place here. Almost finished. Just a couple of examples. This is a very famous pawnbroking shop in Edinburgh, owned by a Lithuanian Jewish gentleman, whose name was Norwich, I can tell you. There's a butcher in Glasgow, which to this day is still called Jacob's, and he was a Lithuanian Jewish immigrant who started a kosher butchery right in the middle of Glasgow. There he is on the census, and you can see his name, and it says Russian and then Lithuanian afterwards. If you're looking for references, these are in the handout. You can look at them. Thanks for your kind attention. But I just want to tell you 2 very quick stories, genealogical stories. A gentleman said his name was Salmon, like the fish, and he said, "Can you find my ancestors in Glasgow for me?" And it took me about an hour to find that his ancestors were Jewish Lithuanians who'd come to Glasgow about 4 generations before. And I phoned him up and said, "I found your ancestors and they're Jewish." And he said to me, "Is that Protestant Jewish or Catholic Jewish?" And the second one is a man in Canada who's called Graham, very Scottish name. And he was he had the kilt, and he joined the Clan Graham Society and all that. And he asked me to find where his family came from in Scotland. And very quickly I discovered that they had never been to Scotland. They were Lithuanians who'd gone to Canada, and they were called Gravinsky or something like that. Actually, he was very pleased, and he took this on. I even found the village where they came from, near Kaunas, and he took his entire family and all his father's sisters on holiday there, and went back to their village just about 4 years ago. So they've become fully Lithuanians, but he still wears the Scottish kilt. Thank you. Email me and I'll send that to you.
Thank you very, very much, Rusteri. And I think the stock, was it stock migration or what was
Stock
the,
migration,
The stock
yeah.
migration,
Yeah.
the poor people thought arriving America and still being in Scotland. Thank you very much for this brilliant lecture, and I would like you to sign this document here that will go to the archives for the next centuries. Here you are.
Centuries.
Yes, centuries, of course. Wherever there's archives are for centuries, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you like. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So now, let's see who's next. The next one is Philippe Lucien Irgon from the University of Bucharest in Romania. A lesser-known genealogical connection between Lithuania and Romania.
I stay with you for the
Hello.
photos, just to help a little bit.
Hello and thank you. It is a great pleasure to be here, and of course I want to thank and to congratulate our Lithuanian friends for such a great event. Of course, I also want already to thank you and also my wife, who will help me with the pictures, with the photos. So, as you already heard, I will talk about some lesser known, I think it works even without the mic, the microphone. I don't know. You hear me. About some lesser known genealogical connections between Romania and Lithuania. And Mr. Vice Leader earlier told us that genealogy can be a way to be together, to be more open to the others. So I will try to invite you to travel, to a fast travel from Romania to Russia, to Switzerland, to France, Italy, the USA, England, and of course, and the most important, to Lithuania. So, of course, the genealogical connections between Lithuania and Romania, and especially Moldavia, the northeastern part of Romania, existed since the Middle Ages, but they did not disappear in more recent times. In the 19th century, a family of petty boyars, petty aristocrats from Moldavia, became related to two aristocratic families from the Russian Empire that had ancient roots in Lithuania. I will tell you later the names. The story begins so in Moldavia, with a family of boyars named Strajescu, or in French, Strejesco. They used the French variant in order to write it to write it easily in foreign languages. I heard about this family from my own aunt, Marie Strejesco, and later on I found information about them in genealogies, in archives, in old documents. The Strejesco are mentioned in the 18th century, and they owned estates in Moldavia and also in Bessarabia, the nowadays Republic of Moldova. One of them, Ioan Strejescu, was a founding member of the Romanian Academy in 1866. The branches of the Strejescu from the Romanian principalities were related to families such as the Princes Mavroieni, a Greek family that gave a regnant prince in Wallachia, or the Roseti. But several branches of this family stayed in Bessarabia after 1812. I think Mr. Leclerc already told you that the Russian Empire took eastern Moldavia in 1812. But these branches of the Strejesco family were very interested in their estates, so they decided to become Russian subjects. I found many details about them in the public archives from Chisinau, the capital of Moldova, but also in an unpublished genealogical tree written by Prince Michel Dimitri Sturza. Some of you probably met him, met the late Prince Michel Sturza. So, one lady, Helen, or Hélène Strejesco, married the petty boyar Constantin Onul, born in 1802, and who owned a village in the Galați County. It is a Moldavian county near the Danube. And the two had a son, Mihail Onul, or Michel Onu. It is easier to pronounce it. We go back to the first photo, please, because we have here in the center the pater familias, Michel Onu, with his children. And now I give you two hints for later. This gentleman, this young man, married a descendant of Grand Chancellor Joachim Hreptovich, and this young lady married a descendant of Gediminas. Michel Onu, the older gentleman, was born in 1835 in Galați, close to the Danube, and he died in Hesse. Oh, I forgot Germany in the enumeration at the beginning. He died in Bad Neuheim. He was a Moldavian boyar by birth, but he became a Russian subject in 1854. His Russian name was Mikhail Konstantinovich Onu. He spoke Romanian, Russian, French, Turkish, and Greek. So he was 19 years old when he became a Russian subject, and he will integrate into the Russian aristocracy. You will see in the next image his coat of arms, the Onu coat of arms, drawn here by our friend Tudor Radu Tiron, the Romanian colleague, from the original that can be found in the Russian Imperial Gerbovnik, the book with the aristocratic coat of arms. He became a diplomat. He was secretary and dragoman of the Russian Consulate General in Constantinople, and then of the Consulate General in Beirut between 1859 and 1863. He was head of the archives and of the library of the Department for Asia in the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, General Secretary of the Russian Embassy in Constantinople between 1869 and 1879, and rose in the diplomatic hierarchy to the rank of Minister Plenipotentiary of the Russian Empire in Greece in 1889. So it's quite a nice diplomatic career for a petty boyar from Moldavia. We can see also, after the coat of arms, some of his manuscripts. And because we are celebrating today the Day of the Archives, I want to stress the importance of private family archives. Of course, public archives are essential, and we must search them, but the family archives are also very important, and I think they are even more important and menaced in those countries that had communist regimes. You know, communists destroyed many family archives because they were considered reactionary. It was the class struggle. But the Onu family, the Strejesco, and their relatives were lucky enough to have many papers conserved, saved in a private family archive in Italy. It is the archive of Mrs. Katia Zoțani, born Maltsov, daughter of Praskovia Hreptovich-Gutenev, so a descendant of Grand Chancellor of Lithuania Joachim Lietuvos Hreptovich. You see here, for example, a page from a letter written by Onu. He also has diplomatic letters received from the Russian Foreign Affairs Minister Nikolai de Girs. You probably heard his name. And he also wrote a text while he was in Beirut, a book, in fact, an unpublished manuscript about Lebanon, Syria, the populations there, and the conflicts between those populations. But we will also speak about the marriage of Michel Onu, of this diplomat. He married on the 6th of July 1864 Baroness Louise Alexandrovna de Jomini, 1843-1906. Who was this lady? She was the granddaughter of this gentleman, who is Baron Antoine-Henri de Jomini, who was a famous general, a famous military strategist also. You can find his book on military strategy. And he was born in Switzerland. He got close to Napoleon, but later on he became a friend of Tsar Alexander I. But what is interesting is the fact that he was never accused of treason, because he never gave plans or other information to the Russians. He died in Paris in 1869. You see here the girl is Louise Onu. She was born Jean-Valérie Louise Petit de Baroncourt. She was the daughter of Baroness Alexandrine de Jomini, who was, in her turn, General Jomini's daughter, and of Marc Petit de Baroncourt, who was a history teacher. The interesting fact is that Louise was adopted by her mother's brother, who was Baron Alexandre de Jomini, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia in 1880, and she was authorized to use the name and title of the barons of Jomini. Michel Onu and Baroness Louise de Jomini had several children. I think I will just tell you a few words about the first of them. Alexandre Onu, who was a historian, who was the chief of the administrative services of the Chancellery of the Provisional Government in Russia in March 1917, and then a consul general in London. Marie Onu, Alexandra Onu, who married Prince Vsevolod Shakhovskoy, a Russian prince, and who was Minister of Commerce and Industry in Russia between 1916 and February 1917. But now, and Andrei Onu, who was the Russian plenipotentiary in Switzerland from 1917, and he was a diplomat who opposed the Bolsheviks during the turmoil in Russia. And now we finally arrive to the children of Louise and Michel Onu, who interest us the most today. Hélène, or Helen Onu, 1870-1955, married this gentleman, Prince Vladimir Vladimirovich Trubetskoy, born in 1868 and he died in 1931. He was Counter-Admiral of the Imperial Russian Navy, and the couple had one son, Prince Nikita Vladimirovich Trubetskoy, 1902-1980, and two daughters, Olga and Kira. The filiation of Prince Vladimir Vladimirovich Trubetskoy can be found in the public genealogies of the Trubetskoy princes, according, for example, to Nikolai Ikonikov, the Ikonikov archive in Paris, from the Institut d'études Slaves, shows that he was the 18th generation from Gediminas. So 18. Well, we might have some variations or problems with this genealogy, but the Trubetskoy at least pretend they are descendants from Gediminas. The other child of Michel Onu and Louise Romini is Constantin Onu, 1875-1950, who is this young man in the photo, who became also a diplomat. You see, they were all diplomats. All the male line of the Onu became diplomats in the Russian Empire. He played quite an important role around and during the revolutionary upheavals in Russia. He was a diplomat in Constantinople, in The Hague, and in 1917 he was chargé d'affaires at the Russian embassy in Washington, and he signed the deal for a loan of $100 million by the USA to Russia. In 1919, he served as a diplomatic chancellor of the Russian White Armies on the front of the Civil War, the armies of Denikin and Wrangel. He is the one who married a descendant of Joachim Lietuvos Hreptovich. And she is the one, she is Catherine, or Katia Konstantinovna Butenev, who was the daughter of Count Konstantin Apolinarievich Hreptovich Butenev, 1848-1932. This count was a descendant of the last Grand Chancellor of Lithuania. So the Lithuanians, of course, have heard about him. Sometimes he's a controversial character because he was a supporter of the Targovica Confederation, so he was a supporter of the Russian alliance, let's say. But at the same time, he was a very important thinker. He freed his serfs. He was very cultivated, and he supported, for example, the university. If you go on the Pilies Street, and we will go together, I think, tomorrow evening, you'll see the church of St. John, the church of the university, and you will find there two marks, two spots very important for the history of this family. A plaque, a memorial plaque on the church, a plaque paid by Joachim Hreptovich for his relatives, and inside the church, if you go inside, you will find the portrait of, and forgive me for the pronunciation, Jurgis Liutauras Hreptovičius, okay? But I start to learn. Okay, a beautiful portrait from the 18th century of an ancestor of the lady you saw, and who was an important philanthropist for that church. So we go back to, you saw Joachim Hreptovich before. You know, in some books, even here in Lithuania, there is a confusion with the portrait of Joachim Lietuvos Hreptovich, the last Grand Chancellor of Lithuania. In my opinion, from what I read, this is the only authentic portrait of him. He had several children, among them a son, Count Irinei Hreptovich, who was married to Carolina Maria von Röhne, and they had a daughter, Countess Maria Hreptovich, who was the wife of Apollinari Petrovich Butenev. This is why the contemporary descendants are Hreptovich Butenev. This Apollinari Butenev was the ambassador of the Russian Empire in Constantinople between 1830 and 1842, and then in Rome. Countess Maria Hreptovich and Apollinari Butenev had 2 sons and 2 daughters. One of the daughters, Maria, 1835-1906, was nicknamed Cocona. She was born in Constantinople, and she was painted by Winterhalter in 1864. I think it's before that. No, it's after, probably. No. Yes, that one, sorry. This portrait can be found today in the family collection in the United States. And they also had 2 sons, Mikhail and Konstantin, who received the right to bear the title of Count Hreptovich Butenev. A very interesting source for the history of the Butenev is the Butenev family chronicle, written by Michael C. Butenev. They don't use the Hreptovich or Hreptavicius anymore in the USA, probably because of the difficulty of writing the name. So he's Count Hreptovich, but he signed the book Michael C. Butenev. I would also say that Katia Onu had a brother, Count Apollinari Konstantinovich Hreptovich Butenev. Sorry for that. They are all of them are either Konstantin or Apollinari. So they are Konstantin Apollinarievich and then Apollinari Konstantinovich. It's a bit confusing for genealogists, but it's also quite amusing. Her brother, a diplomat, also married Princess Maria Trubetskoy, and her sister, Maria, married Prince Grigory Nikolaevich Trubetskoy. So you see the Hreptovich liked to marry to the Trubetskoy. I don't know if the supposed Lithuanian roots of the Trubetskoy contributed to this closeness of the 2 families, but they are very, very, very linked. You see here the tombs of the Onu and Trubetskoy and Hreptovich in France. I promised you I would also talk about France, in Clamart, close to Paris. It's a cemetery with many, many Russian and Polish and Lithuanian graves. But in order not to finish with something too gloomy, too pessimistic with the tombs, I show you 2 residences of the Hreptovich family. This one is the manor, the palace in Biesankovichi. It is in Belarus now, and it still exists in a quite honorable shape. Unfortunately, the other one, the next one, the next manor, this one is Chorche, again in Belarus, was bombed during World War I and again during World War II, and unfortunately they don't have much remainings of the building there. But this was a very, very important cultural place, because Grand Chancellor Joachim Hreptovich had a huge library, and for example, poet Adam Mickiewicz wrote there in the library of the Hreptovich. Again, a bit of optimism. I can tell you that a few weeks ago, a professor from England, an engineering professor, I was shocked, wrote me he found in a box of stamps a few letters addressed to Catherine Onu. So to the lady you saw earlier, the wife of Constantin Onu. And he sent me these letters. Among them, a few letters sent by her father during World War I, when her husband was chargé d'affaires in Washington, D.C., and also some letters from her niece, Kira Trubetskoy, who only lived 26. She died at 26 years old. And we finish with the two images we saw earlier. Constantin Onu in his old age, and his brother-in-law, Count Hreptovich Butenev, playing chess where? In France, in Bord-de-Bure. Bord-de-Bure was the traditional residence of the Jomini, the ancestors from the Swiss branch. And at the end, a photo where you can see the entire family before World War I and the Revolution. And you see here the patriarch, another pater familias, the Count Hreptovich Butenev, with his wife born Baranov. You can see his son, the next Count Hreptovich, with his wife, who was a Trubetskoy. And you can see Mihai Constantin Onu, with his wife Katia Hreptovich Butenev, who was probably our main character today. And if you look, because pictures are interesting, are fascinating, are full of charm, but if we pay attention, we can find out fascinating things about history, but also about art. And you see here, it is the original painting I showed you before, and now the painting is in a public museum in Moscow, I think, the Pushkin Museum. Before. It's a portrait of
This one?
no, before. Yes, this one. The last true, let's say, the Hreptovich Countess with her daughter Kokona. And I finish with this image, genealogical tree drawn by a lady, by Kokona, by the small child you saw before. She left us lots of letters, a diary, and these are archives that are not published. I hope in the future we will be able to transcribe and to translate and maybe to publish these archives, these family archives dedicated to one of the important Lithuanian families, the Hreptovich. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here.
Dr. Yoga, thank you very much for your lecture, and I would like you to also to sign this whenever you like over this.
Only the signature.